Okay, so we might as well get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. My name is Emily Potter. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Ontario Farm Innovation Alliance, or NOFIA for short. So we are a nonprofit organization that works to advance agriculture across Northern Ontario through applied agricultural research and innovation projects, working with all stakeholders within the industry. We're really excited to be partnered with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture Northern Caucus on this project. This is an initiative that started before I had joined NOFIA and has been a topic of importance over the years, taking a look at the agricultural plastic coming out of Northern Ontario and how we can manage that and work to come up with a better solution. I won't spend too much time because I'll let Steph talk about that. But just for a brief overview of tonight, so we will talk about the project itself and have a bit of a demo. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So everyone right now is automatically muted and video off. So if you could try and divert your questions to the Q&A, which is on the panel at the bottom of your screen, should be down there. Instead of using the chat function, just so that things don't get lost within the chat. It's a lot easier to moderate from the Q&A. So with that, I don't think there's any other housekeeping things, but I'll turn it over to Steph and we'll get started.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So as Emily mentioned, this is a collaborative effort between NOFIA and the OFA, the Northern Caucus specifically. So that is the 10 federations of agriculture across Northern Ontario who have been pushing for sustainable or a better way of recovering and managing their agricultural plastic waste for years. So just to give you a overview of agriculture in Northern Ontario. So it supports over 12,000 jobs. It generates over $580 million towards the provincial GDP, and its annual farm cash receipts are growing year to year. So this is partly due to the opening up of land across the north, as well as the improvement in productivity of existing acreage through tile drainage, as well as agri-tech advances and a changing climate, really changing what we can grow here, the viability of those commodities, and increasing the opportunity for agriculture in the north. But with that, agriculture in general comes plastics. So plastic is an essential part of agriculture. It helps with the viability and the longevity of feed, the quality of feed, things like that. There's a lot of initiatives, and the OFA funds some of them, looking at more sustainable options for plastic, so biodegradable options for net wrap, twine, things like that. But we're a pretty long way, at least in Northern Ontario, from having those as viable alternatives. So this project is meant to be a little bit of a stopgap to get us from where we are to where we want to be in terms of sustainability and end-of-life management of plastic, recognizing that we will be using plastic in its current form for the next number of years. The issue with, I mean, there's a lot of issues with agricultural plastic in general, but the issue we face, we don't have a great way to manage it in the sector in general, and it's also becoming more obvious or more aware in the public perception. So there's been a lot of pressure on single-use plastics and other plastics for the last couple of years. Agriculture as a whole is a very small portion of the total plastic use, but it can be very visible. So as people drive by fields or drive down highways and they see the little white marshmallows in the field or the long white rolls beside the barn, and they ask us what we do with that plastic, our answers right now aren't great. Typical end-use management options: burying, burning, and landfilling, none of which are sustainable, some of which are perhaps not legal, none of which are great. Some municipalities still accept agricultural plastic, either at pickup or you can bring it to the landfill, but those are becoming fewer and farther in between. So it's putting farmers in a little bit of a tighter corner year after year as that public pressure mounts, as we want to, within the industry, do a better job in terms of sustainability, and as our end-of-life management options start to diminish. So recognizing all of those issues and that we don't have a great way to deal with them, NOFIA a few years ago commissioned a study just to quantify what kind of plastic we're looking at, because we need to know what we're dealing with before we can actually deal with it. We found at the time that we're generating about 820 tons a year. That's increasing approximately to 940 tons by next year. 3 main types, so polypropylene, low density polyethylene, and that's your heavier, denser plastic, your silage bunker covers, your silage grain bags, and your linear low density polyethylene. So that's your bale and silage wrap, the more flexible, malleable, the stuff you can crunch up, the thinner plastics. As you can see here on this chart, by far in Northern Ontario, our main plastic use is that LLDPE, so the thinner bale and silage wrap, which is, because of the sheer number, the focus of the pilot. I'll just note here, so we didn't look at plastics that are currently recovered. So groups like Clean Farms do a lot of work in Ontario and across Canada in plastics recovery for agricultural plastics. So for example, in Northern Ontario, they have pickup points for the really high density plastic totes, plastic jugs. So we didn't look at those options because they already exist. Even if they aren't accessible in every area, they're there and they can be built upon. Clean Farms is doing a lot of work in other types of plastic now since we built the pilot. And it's really encouraging to see this really major push on more sustainable end uses of plastic. The challenges with the plastic, and this goes back to why we don't have really great management options currently. One is that the plastic is obviously loose and dispersed, especially in Northern Ontario, where there's a large distance between hubs. There's a lot of space between farms. Having loose plastic blowing around or trying to put it in the back of a pickup truck or in a tote isn't great in terms of transport or in terms of storage. So our first obstacle in dealing with this plastic and developing a steward program was how to deal with that. So the solution was these compactors. So that's that picture on the left, the wooden compactor that makes the beautiful plastic bales on the right. A properly compacted bale will weigh between 900 and 1,000 pounds. It's a nice, pretty much square bale, so that makes it really effective, one, for storing. It can be tucked away in a corner of a shed, but also effective for us to do with the logistics of shipping. So we know the rough size, we know the rough density, hopefully, which makes it easy for us to eventually plan for shipping these bales to an end user. For the pilot, the cost to participate is $900. That includes the compactor, the plunger, which you can't really see in that picture, getting the compactors to your general area, as well as participation in the pilot itself. The compactors themselves are about $700. We do have blueprints licensed. So if someone wants to make their own compactor, they can just reach out to us and we can share the blueprints with them. We're just not broadcasting them widely because we would like to still know who's out there making compactors. The compactors themselves come from UPAC Agri Service. So this is Lynn Levitt. He is the guy in the checkered shirt on the left in that picture. He's in Eastern Ontario and he's been involved in plastics for at least a decade. So he's a beef farmer, but he's very passionate about trying to find sustainable use for plastics. So he's been building these compactors for a while. He had about 40 bales shipped out last year to an end user. So he's been very diligent. He's been a real big driving force in this pilot, and we currently purchase the compactors from him and then get them across the north. The other major challenge in terms of how to recover this plastic is the end user. So if there's one thing I've learned in working on this project in the last few years, what is there today is not there tomorrow, especially in plastics recovery business, and especially when the price of oil drops. So when the price of a barrel of oil is dirt cheap or zero, as we've seen in the last year, it's much cheaper to make new plastic than it is to recover and recycle existing plastic. So that makes it really hard for end users who are trying to make a product from that plastic. In addition, and that's specific to our experience with agricultural plastic, this plastic, is outside, it's got feed in it, it's got dirt on it, it's got manure on it maybe. If we need to clean that plastic, pretty much a non-starter for the farmer, but also for us. So we want farmers to participate, and to have that happen, we need to make it accessible to them to do so. So to require them to wash their plastic, to somehow keep it clean in the winter when it's freezing, or in the spring and fall when it's muddy, is quite a barrier. We did cost out what it would look like for us to pick up dirty plastic and wash it ourselves and get it processed that way. And it was just too much of a cost to justify, regardless of the price of oil or the price of the end product. So we were lucky enough to find BBL Energy. So they are a company located in Johnstown, so also Eastern Ontario. They are building a proof of concept plant to demonstrate pyrolysis. So the next slide, I'll get into a little bit about what pyrolysis is. But they have a couple advantages in terms of they can accept not clean plastic. They can accept plastic, which will eventually, I think, be a really important consideration, a game changer for recovery. And they turn it into power. So they can convert it to fuel and electricity, which is a really nice story wrapped up in a nice little bow of farmers using plastic, using fuel on their farm. That fuel was full, or that plastic was full circle back into the fuel, which is used back on the farm. So this is a very, very, very high level idea of pyrolysis. I'm not a scientist. The concepts behind this are quite specific and way above my pay grade, but I'll quickly go through this just so you get an idea of how it works. They take the feedstock, so in our case, it would be the bale of plastic. They would put it into a capsule or a module where there's no oxygen, and then they provide indirect heat, very high temperature indirect heat, that converts the plastic hydrocarbons into different molecular forms that either produces a condensable gas. So in that case, it would be a fuel mix they can use to make diesel fuel, or a non-condensable gas, which then gets fed into another unit that produces power. So that power can either be powering the system itself, the pyrolysis system, or if there's surplus, can be sold back to the grid. So BBL is not a waste management company. They don't want to be a waste management company. They are in the business of developing and selling these pyrolysis units. So their open demonstration demonstrate obviously that it works, show proof of concept, and gather data for a business plan. So they can then sell a couple hundred of these units across Ontario, a couple thousand across North America, to either waste management companies or to larger municipalities. So you'll see in this next slide, there's a couple kilometer indicators, 420 kilometers, 466 kilometers. That's currently how many kilometers it is from our closest pickup sites to BBL Energy, which is not effective if you're looking at the sustainability footprint. So the gains that we make from recovering that plastic into fuel and electricity will likely be lost by the fact that we have to ship this at minimum 466 kilometers or 420 kilometers away. In BBL's ideal world, and in perhaps a more cohesive, sustainable waste management structure, we could say have a pyrolysis module in the city of North Bay, or the city of Sudbury, or the city of Thunder Bay, where they can not just take ag plastic, because that's a very small part of the puzzle, but take all non-recyclable, recoverable plastic and convert it to those power sources. So we're obviously a long way off, but this is their first step. And it was a really great match for our pilot, which is also our first step in seeing how this stewardship model could look. So on a very high level, this is what the pilot is. So essentially, we are getting these compactors on farm or at communal sites. The farmer or the site will store the bale once it's completed until we are ready once or twice a year to pick up those bales and ship them to the end user. You can see here, those are just some of the numbers in terms of what we produce. Again, in terms of the lighter plastics, what we could recover. So again, in a recovery model, you expect a pretty low participation rate, especially at first, and what that translates to in terms of number of bales. The overall outcomes of the project. So obviously getting these compactors across the north and in use, developing the stewardship program itself. So this would be the materials to get farmers on board, parameters for collection sites, quality control, things like that. The really important parts of the project are the last 2 points. So collecting the data, what is the optimal level of contamination in each bale compared to what's a realistic level of contamination, what's the financial viability, the total cost of the project, what it looks like if there's no money coming in, and best manager practice in a business case. So we anticipate, and this is kind of what was the driving force behind the pilot, that at some point we may be mandated, legally required to deal with our plastics. And one way that could look like is that the supplier of the plastic, whoever you buy your plastic from, charges a fee that you as a farmer pay, and they will handle the recovery of the plastic. And that is great. They for sure should be at the table. They could likely help manage the end user, the recovery of that. But we're still faced with the same issue of still having all of that loose dispersed plastic hundreds of kilometers apart across Northern Ontario. And if you don't make it accessible to somehow gather that plastic and recover that plastic, if it's too much work, if it's too far to go, things like that, those barriers could mean that farmers pay that fee and they still have no viable way of recovering that plastic, and it still gets burned, buried, or landfilled, which again defeats the purpose, is not great for the ag industry, and it's not something that necessarily the farmers want. We're just faced with the challenge that we can't deal with the plastic ourselves at this point. So the 2020 pilot so far, so this was officially launched in April of 2020. We currently have 20 compactors in use across Northern Ontario. Some of these, the majority of them, I should say, are individuals. So a farmer buys a compactor and they use it themselves and they make their own bale. If you are farming and you have the equivalent of 300 to 400 bales a year, that makes sense for you to have your own. You'll make a bale in a year and a half, maybe a little bit under, and you produce a lot of plastic to store and then try to bring somewhere else. Some of these compactors are on a farm, but they're shared amongst neighbors, especially in areas where you know your neighbors, or in areas where you don't individually necessarily generate a lot of plastic. These are more informal arrangements. So we deal with the farmer who purchased the compactor. So if they want to share it with their neighbor, they handle whatever biosecurity concerns they have. They handle how they want to deal with that. We do, or we will, before the bales are shipped, tag each bale for traceability purposes. So if there is an issue with that bale, we will still be dealing with that individual farmer who can then manage his neighboring partners or however he wants. So far, we have about 100 bales of plastic collected and ready to go. And if we assume, hopefully, that each bale is 900 to 1,000 pounds, we have that many tons of plastic. And then we have two parts of the pilot that are a little more involved. So the first is a pilot within a pilot with the township of Chisholm. They jumped on board really, really early. So they are a township in Northern Ontario, pretty close to Powassan, North Bay area. This picture on the slide is their compactor. So they purchased a compactor. They have it at their public works yard. We did a training session in August, and now they have days available. Farmers can drop off their plastic, and the public works guys will compact it for them. So they've made one bale so far. They're well on their way to a second. The outcomes or the reaction so far have been very positive, both from the farmers who participate and from the public. So again, it's a optics wise, it's a very nice story. It'll be nicer once we get these bales to an end user and can talk about that specifically. And then a partnership with Lennox and Addington County. So this is brand new. They are in, I will say, Eastern Ontario, and we are able to add them to the pilot. One, because there was some folks out there who were really keen to get started, but also they are pretty much directly on our path from Northern Ontario to the end user. So it's really easy to schedule an extra pickup and throw some bales on a load going out there already. So we have two compactors going out to farmers there very shortly, hopefully with some more coming online as they start to see how these work and get the word out there. So I'm going to show this video. It was included in your emails. So if your internet is spotty right now and you can't really watch it, or if it jumps around, feel free to watch it afterwards. I will speak through it just to give some extra clarity and advice. The compactor itself is pretty intuitive, but it's helpful to see how it works before you try to work it. Once people see how it works, they can't believe they couldn't figure it out. But it's helpful to at least watch the video if you can't see it in person. So unmute that, sorry. There's music in it, but just to hide other background noise, so you don't need to listen to it. So the compactor itself, you have to cover it when it's not in use to keep the bale as dry as possible. Put it on a flat surface, obviously for compaction. And if you want to keep it a really nice, neat bale, you can fold a piece of plastic on the bottom and the top. You would add your plastic. I'll get into this in a little bit later, but single stream where possible, and you just shake it to get as much debris out of it as possible. At the start of the bale, you kind of push a 2x4 into the corners just to get it really nice and even. And then you compact it. So you put your plunger on your tractor spear, you push it into the compactor, and you push down. For the first half-ish or so of the compactor, you would flip the plunger over to get a little more leverage, and then you compact. So you can see here, it's going down quite quickly. What people want to do is once they start to see it go down, they stop compacting. You want to leave it on there for maybe an hour or two, because it might only go down an inch or two more, but those inch or two is important. So you'd use it in your regular routine. Some people might load it, compact it once a week, some once a month, depending on how much plastic they have. The fewer times you compact, the more compaction you'll probably have to do each time. Comes with a metal fire poker looking thing. And that's what you use for the twine. So you'd add your twine through the 6 slats, either before or after your bale. At the end of your bale, you'd bring that same piece of twine through the other side, and then you would tie it off. You'll see here in a second or two, you really tie it tight. So the twine is what's holding your bale together. When you release the bale from the compactor, it'll expand a little bit, but you want that twine to have tension to keep that bale really nice and square. You pop your twine off, or you pop your compactor off, and then add 3 more pieces of twine on the other ends, just to keep it really secure. So really pull on that twine. And then you eject it. So it comes with a couple 2x4s. You would put those 2x4s through the compactor to secure your plunger in place. You've got some tie straps to take off. And then you lift your compactor up. You'd put a couple cinder blocks down, and then you would push the plunger to push the bale down. For some people, this is enough. Their bale might kind of come out with a couple shakes. I'd suggest being gentle just so you don't break the compactor. If you want to be really safe, you would lift it back up, flip your cinder blocks over, and then one more time, press the plunger down. That will push your bale out pretty much completely, and you would just lift your compactor up and off. And then you have a beautiful bale that you would then push onto another pallet. You'd tie those 3 or 4 pieces of twine, and then you're done. So it's pretty intuitive, especially once you get that first bale made. So some best practices so far, as I said, we're less than a month into this, but Lynn and his compactors who are out across Ontario and Quebec have been compacting for quite a while. Where possible, keeping that bale single stream is best. And by single stream, I mean really, really heavy bale and silage, your silage bunker covers, egg bags, things like that, from your lighter bale and silage wrap. Obviously, this depends on your farm and the kind of plastic you use and the amount of plastic you use. So some farmers, if they use predominantly one, are making the bale out of the one plastic and then not putting their plastic into the pilot. Some farmers are mixing a bale. The challenge with mixing a bale is that at this point, we will be limited on who can take that bale. So BBL, again, the greatness of them is that they can take a mixed bale of plastic, and that's fantastic. But if they ever fall through, or when we're able to find a second end user to kind of compare and contrast, the mixed bales of plastic will have less options to find homes. So it just means you might hold on to your bale for longer, maybe forever if our BBL doesn't work out. So that's the challenge with the mixed bale. A lot of the other end users, especially the ones that make composite products, are much more particular on the types of plastic in their bales and can usually only handle a single stream. The next 2 points kind of go hand in hand. So make it a part of your regular routine. For the farmers who are using these compactors, if they make it, however their feeding routine looks, if they make it part of it, it doesn't add a lot of time. So if you take your plastic off, you throw it in your feed shed, you let it dry out for a day, and the next day before you cut your next bale, you put it in the compactor. It might add a minute or two. If you're tossing your plastic into a pile, letting that pile build up, especially if that pile's outside, you're doing twice as much work than once every 3 months or once a year, unpiling that plastic, trying to shake it all out, because by now it's gotten really gross, and then put it in a compactor. So if you make it part of your routine, not compacting it necessarily, you can compact it once a week, once a month, whatever works with how much plastic you're using, but actually putting the plastic into the compactor to keep it cleaner will make a better bale. The same goes for having a stationary compactor. So we're hearing some things out of Quebec with some of their projects there, and we've seen with some of our compactors, the compactors where they're not in one place all the time. And by that, I mean, we have a compactor available in Northern Ontario that a farmer can borrow or use for a week and then bring back. Those are obviously addressing existing piles of plastic, but it is a lot more work, and your piles tend to be more contaminated with debris. So we're finding that if a farm can have a compactor on site, it makes a much nicer bale. Again, BBLs and end user can take a bale with debris. So if there's carbon inputs in the bale, it will result in carbon outputs that can be used as either a soil amendment or used with wood pellets to make a biochar, but that's less valuable than the fuel or the power. So they prefer to have more plastic and less non-plastic in that bale. And the fourth thing here, and this seems really obvious, but to compact it. And we cannot stress this enough. Everyone's first bale is probably going to look not great, a little wonky, maybe pancake out or quite large, or maybe 200 pounds or 400 pounds light. And 99 times out of 100, that's because it wasn't compacted enough. So when you see the compaction look like it stops, leave the pressure on, because it's going to go down, it's going to compress some more air and moisture out, maybe only an inch or two, but that makes a difference when the bale is complete. So everyone will kind of figure it out what works for them in terms of timing, dependent on the density of your plastic and how often you're compacting. So your second bales will probably look much better than your first ones, but it's really important on our end so we can logistically plan for shipping. If we expect all the bales to be about 4x4x6, and your bale is 4x4x8 or 4x5 by like random sizes, it's going to be hard to fit all the bales in a load. If your bale isn't compacted enough, it won't be dense enough. So if we're expecting a 900-pound bale and it's 500, that means that we're still paying to ship it halfway across the province, but it's half as light as we wanted. So we're just spending more money for nothing. And at the end user end, again, they're expecting a certain amount of plastic. So if we're sending them half loads of plastic, it's not great for what they need as well. So it's really important to figure out how that works for you, but to make sure it's fully compacted. Your second bales will probably look quite a bit different than the first. And that's just a thing we're seeing across all users. So the challenges, the first is the consistency of end users. So as I mentioned, it's a little bit of a here today, gone tomorrow industry. So it would be really easy to sell this pilot if we had shipped loads of plastic already, or if we for sure had an end user ready to go. The challenge with this, so a farmer would like to know that the plastic's not going to sit in his yard for years. We would also like to know and to promise that. But to go to an end user, it's much easier to go to an end user and say, I have 40 tons of plastic. It looks like this. Will you take it now? Than it is to go, I will have 40 tons of plastic in 2 years. Will you take it then? So it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing. You need to have a critical mass of plastic to be attractive to an end user. But to get that critical mass of plastic, we would like to have an end user. In this case, we do have an agreement with BBL. They have been delayed because of COVID-19. So a lot of their parts and their expertise comes from Europe. They were expected to get operational last March, but obviously they've been at a standstill for quite some time. Their parts. So now they're finishing installation before they go through the final round of approvals. So they are moving ahead. It's just been much slower than we expected. To that end, so Mark Kunkel is the provincial director for Northern Ontario for the OFA. He jumped on this pilot long before it was an actual pilot. And what was the selling point for him was, even if there's no end user for a while and he has to sit on some bales for a year or 2 or 3 or 4, having a 900-pound bale of plastic in the corner of his shed is a more effective management option than having that 900 pounds of plastic managed the way he was currently. So as a management tool, it's still really important to consolidate and aggregate the plastic. As a successful pilot and as a kind of end of life full use management thing, we would really like to get things shipped to BBL just to have that under our belt. As I mentioned, so COVID-19 has been the other major challenge. So COVID-19 has impacted our end user, but it's also heavily impacted how we deliver the pilot. So this, as with many kind of on-farm innovative tools, this really lends itself to having a pilot in every area that you can host a crop tour around, or a pilot at the Earlton Farm Show or the Thunder Bay Spring Conference, where farmers can see it, they can touch it, they can figure out how they would improve it, you can talk them through it. And we haven't been able to do that this year because of COVID-19, and we don't expect that to happen this year either. So in areas where we've been talking about plastics for a few years and we have a couple of the early adopters, that champion kind of model is picking up steam. In areas where we haven't had a lot of presence or don't have a compactor going yet, it's moving much slower than we expected. It's also impacting our ability to troubleshoot and quality control. Again, ideally, either myself or Emily would be on site at some point to kind of walk through how to use the compactor, be on site for quality control, troubleshooting, things like that. But because it's been fairly restrictive this past year, we haven't been able to do that. All of this has been done remotely and virtually. And the other aspect of COVID-19 that has impacted the project is the formalization of the aggregation sites. So once the bales are all compacted and we have a date to get them to the end user, we will have to centralize those bales and load them up and ship them out. Again, making those relationships, those agreements are much easier in person when you can visit the site, talk them through the project, and see how it would fit in their yard, what equipment they could use, if we have enough space to load, things like that. And again, all of that isn't happening. So I expect in 2021, this centralization will be much more informal, as we tend to do things in Northern Ontario agriculture. We'll be pretty quick about it. We'll have a day where we'll meet with the bales at a random, tag all the bales for quality control, and then get them shipped out as quick as possible. They can't sit in one location too long, otherwise people get the idea that we're creating a waste management depot, which is not regulations we want to get into. So those are some of the challenges we've seen so far, mostly due to COVID-19, which didn't exist when we made the pilot, but has been our reality since we launched. So how to get involved in the project. So if you want more information generally at any point in time, you can reach out to myself or Emily. If you live in Northern Ontario and you want to get involved, you can deal with us. If you live in Lennox and Addington, the project leads there are Tracy Snow or Racy Walt, so you can get in touch with either of them. And if you're not in those catchment areas, but you still want to compact your plastic, that's fantastic. You can reach out directly to Lynn, so the guy that makes these compactors. You can for sure start compacting your plastic. You can make your own compactor. We have a few people that have done that using odds and ends on their farm. The caveat being, if you're not in the catchment areas of the pilot, there may not be a home for that plastic. So if you've got a couple bales of plastic lying around, it might be hard to convince an end user to take that plastic. They might want, 40 bales or 30 bales or 10. At the same time, as a management tool, it doesn't hurt to start collecting and consolidating that plastic in anticipation that we need to do something with it. And even if that doesn't happen, at least it's in a pretty little square on your farm rather than a pile that's blown across the neighbor's field. So this is our contact to get involved. This is my contact specifically, especially if you're a farmer in Northeastern Ontario and have issues on your farm, you can reach out to me anytime. And with that is the end of the formal presentation. We will open it up to questions.
Thanks, Steph. And for those who joined a little bit late, if you have questions, if you could drop them into the Q&A where it's a little bit easier to moderate them, that would be great. One of the things I forgot to mention at the start as well is that we will have the slides available, and hopefully, if the recording works, a recording of tonight's webinar available after the session. So to jump into questions, the first question that we have up is, are you involving any waste management companies with this project?
Not at this point. BBL is doing a lot of work with the waste management companies themselves. I think if there's interest, there might be some synergies, but that might be beyond the scope of what we're capable of doing at this point. There might be some smaller companies that service Northern Ontario that we could work with, but we haven't reached out to them at this point, no.
Before I move on to next questions, also, if you have really specific questions about how the pilot might work on your farm, we just ask that you contact us afterwards for that, where it might be a little bit more easy to have a one-on-one conversation. But the next question is, what's been the reception by municipalities, and is there a cost to the municipality? And as an additional comment with that, it seems like a logical way to collect that could help market the idea, though I get that transportation to or pick up by the end user remains an issue.
Yeah, so the municipalities that have heard of the project have been very receptive, specifically in how it will help them stop taking agricultural plastic into their landfills. Chisholm Township is the one we're working with so far to see how the logistics of that work. There is some questions around manning the compactor. How do you ensure that people are dropping off not crap plastic or not plastic, things like that. So we haven't delved too much into how we work with specific municipalities apart from Chisholm, because we prefer to make mistakes with one or two rather than make the same mistakes across municipalities across the north. But I think a lot of municipalities that have reached out to us so far are very, very happy to have perhaps a solution that they don't have to continue to take agricultural plastic, because it's they have the perception that it's filling up their landfill because it takes so much space, because it's so dispersed.
Thanks. Once past the pilot, what is the pricing of the pyrolysis technology?
The pyrolysis technology is incredibly pricey to me, but in waste management world, apparently it's not, it's a palatable number. So they have modular systems that can be scaled depending on the waste streams coming into the system. But you're talking about millions of dollars for these pyrolysis units. They're not meant to be small things you have in a little town. They're meant to, I think the smallest pyrolysis unit they have right now is 24 tons a day that they can take in. So they're meant to take in a lot of input. That said, they take in a lot of things apart from obviously agricultural plastic. So city waste management stream, who has a better understanding of what their waste inputs are, would then be able to figure out kind of what size they would need and how much that would cost. To me, that's a lot of money, but when we chat with some people in the municipal world who deal in waste, that is a number that sounds about right to them. And BBL is hopeful. I mean, obviously that's their business model, to sell these things, but they are hopeful that they can get fairly high critical mass across Ontario if they can prove the technology works, and if there's a bit of an effort provincially and federally to support different models of waste recovery than the current recycling and landfilling.
So this might have already kind of been touched on, but did you have more municipalities coming on board similar to Chisholm?
Not formally yet. We've had some discussions with a couple other ones in Northern, specific to setting up the centralization sites. So we've been focused, I mean, if a municipality wants to get on board with the communal compacting, that's great, but our focus primarily would be the centralized sites, because that a communal compacting site is great, and it's for accessibility, so that way all farmers can participate. But we really need that centralized site, or else it's gonna be hard to pick up all those bales. So that's where more of the municipal focus has been how can they provide that site where we can have bales dropped off and picked up, given that they will likely have enough space, but also likely have like a loader or something to actually load those bales onto the truck. In an ideal world, and this is likely beyond the scope of the pilot, but if this were to be more of a formalized stewardship model, it would be great if centralized sites, so whether that's a municipal site or whether that's a large private partner that has a large area for kind of like a large yard, it would be great if we had a compactor on every centralized site. So that way, when a farmer's dropping off their bale, at that point, we know that load is going. And if we know it's going to an end user that can take a mixed bale, then they can bring all of their other pieces of plastic. If they have a tote of twine, or if they have a tote of plastic they don't use regularly, then we can make a mixed bale and deal with all of the plastic on farm. But that's likely going to be after the next 2 years of the rest of this pilot.
Will there be an extension of the pilot project because of the challenges created by COVID?
I don't know. So it's funded through CAP, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And right now the project is funded until the end of CAP. So we might be very limited in terms of funding options if we wanted to extend it, because it likely can't go beyond the duration of the actual funding program itself. The pilot itself can. It would just depend on how we work around the cost of the last shipment or two. So we can be perhaps innovative in doing that, but I don't know that our formal funded pilot can extend beyond, I want to say September 2022, just because that's when the funding itself, other funding stream, hopefully.
Is there a compactor in the Muskoka area?
There is not at this point, top of my head.
Are we allowed a little bit of leeway as far as dirt until we ship a few bales, since everyone's opinion of dirt is different?
Yes. So I think what we're kind of going by now is more of a visual assessment. So if you look at your bale and you can see literal like chunks of stuff hanging out of the bale, and if you look at that bale and you kind of question, like, is this a bale of plastic or a bale of carbon, like crap, that might be an indication that you've got too much stuff in your bale. But yes, for sure. So I think the part of the point is to figure out what those levels are, because we're tracing every bale. If we do have issues with bales, because we haven't sent any yet, we haven't had this yet, but if we do have issues in terms of quality, in terms of there's just way too much stuff in that bale, you need to do a better job, we would contact the farmer and likely just head out there and see how they're making the bale and how we can try to improve it. But there'd be at least one warning, because again, this is a learning experience for all of us. So because we don't know what those levels are, and because I don't know if it would, the interpretation of debris would be different for everyone, but there's at some point a level that's too much. So it would be figure out what that level is and making sure that them close or over are aware, and that we can figure out why that's happening. Typically, again, if you're doing it kind of as part of your daily thing or weekly thing, and if you're just shaking out the plastic and maybe not leaving it outside before you put it in the compactor, usually that's enough. The stuff just flies right off it. We might see or have a harder time dealing with stuff that's compacted in the spring from over the winter. And that if we're finding problems with that, we'll have to address that as they come, troubleshooting with the farmer himself or herself.
Kind of along those lines, how dry does the wrap have to be before you compact it from like snow or rain or things like that?
As dry as possible, preferably. The compactor will push out moisture. So if you put wet plastic in it, you will see all the water drip out. But it's best if you keep the bale as dry as possible. And that might be even more important than cleanliness. So just if we can keep as little moisture as possible in the bale would be great. So if your plastic is, and again, I think that's where the winter, we might have troubles in the winter, especially if you have nowhere to put your plastic between using it and compacting it. But if you can keep your plastic under cover, if it's wet, a day or two before you put it in the compactor itself, that will help. And if it is wetter than dry, then really, 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 really compact it to get as much of that out as you can.
So I think these are kind of similar questions. So is there any options with regards to recycling baler twine now or in the foreseeable future? Or is the plastic baler twine accepted in the bale?
So again, if the bales are, so I mean, the bales are tied to twine, so some twine is acceptable. Where we might run into issues if there's a ton of twine in that bale. If your bale is half twine and half plastic, that would depend on the end user. So again, BBL, they can take that no problem. A composite product end user would have a harder time. I don't know. So again, ideally, we would have the capacity to take twine when we do pickups. Whether we have kind of those bigger totes, when you drop off your bale, we have a tote available, throw your twine in there. That would be something we would ideally like to include while we're doing the pickups. We just haven't been able to do that yet because we haven't scheduled pickup. So we'd hope to be able to deal with the twine. I don't know off the top of my head if there's anything else happening with twine right now in Northern Ontario specifically. I don't think so. And any of the projects that Clean Farms has been looking at aren't happening yet, to my knowledge, in Northern Ontario. So I think that would be the only option when we schedule a pickup, if you have a lot of twine.
Is there support coming from the manufacturers of the actual bale wrap?
Not now. We also haven't approached them. So the challenge we had when we were doing the report initially, the quantification of the plastic, the easiest thing would have been to go to the suppliers and ask, how much plastic do you sell in Northern Ontario? But we realized that there's not like a monopoly. So it wasn't like we could contact 2 suppliers and deal with it. People got their plastic from everywhere around the world. So we had to talk to individual farmers and extrapolate from there. So it'd be the same thing. So you could probably find the top 2 or 3 manufacturers of plastic to get them on board in certain areas. We haven't, because the majority of the funding for the project is through CAP. And we expect that with the data we get from the pilot, ideally, we'd be in a good position that when a stewardship model is developed, we can provide input into what works, what doesn't for Northern farmers. But we expect at some point, a lot of the onus will fall on the plastic suppliers to at least support the end use of that plastic. Not necessarily the recovery of it because of the challenges in that, but the end use and what happens. How are you recovering that plastic as a primary producer of plastic?
So I think this question is asking about the price people are paying for 1 bale of compacted plastic. So are they getting paid to buy the plastic, or are they buying plastic?
No, so BBL isn't buying plastic. They are not picking up the plastic. So they will take our plastic for free if we drive business. Because there's a lot of pressure on plastic disposal, they have more feedstock than they need. So they don't need to pay for plastic because people are willing to give it to them to have a disposal. Again, once we figure out the numbers and the efficiency of conversion and the financial part of that, then there might be a better understanding of what the value of each bale is to the end user, but also if there could be value placed on the bale for the farmer. Being able to provide a stipend for each bale, even if it's a small one, will act as an incentive to get more people to participate. The ones that'll jump on when it's in the pilot stage, when it's at cost to them for the compactor, and when they're not getting paid, are the ones that are either really tired of the current management option, or the ones that are kind of the early adopters, the ones that want to be part of that sustainable solution. But that isn't getting that isn't even getting the majority of farmers. So if you want to make this really palatable, it would be nice if their incentive to get them to deal with their plastic. But at this point, we don't have the data yet to know if that's even possible with the true cost of a model like this.
Just to jump back to the twine, can net wrap be included in the bale?
Net wrap might be challenging. I guess if you can get it, I mean, net wrap can be pretty dirty. So I guess if you can get it clean, I would say it's fine. But likely, I mean, it's a different type of plastic. So it would likely have to go in with like the bale and silage wrap, not the heavier stuff. But net wrap can be tricky in terms of just shaking out enough debris to make sure. I mean, net wrap's a situation where you could have half a bale of debris and half a bale of net wrap, which might not be super valuable for the end user.
Could we coordinate with municipal hazardous waste days to have the plastic picked up?
That could be an option. We just haven't gotten that far yet in terms of knowing where we need bales picked up or how many are ready. So at this point, we have bales ready in Manitoulin and Algoma, Nipissing, Powassan area, Temiskaming, and maybe some in Cochrane. But we don't, until we have the end user online, we haven't done a lot of work in terms of how many bales in each area and where or when it would make sense to pick those bales up. But I think as we start to get an idea of how many bales are being made every year in every area, then we have a better grasp of when we're approaching a partner to be that centralized site, what that would look like for them, what the expectations are for them, and make some of those formal arrangements. And if we could piggyback on things that already exist, like those days, or when Clean Farms does pickups, then I think it makes it a little less work for everyone involved. We just haven't gotten that far yet in the actual pilot.
Specifically for Lennox and Addington, at their pickup point, will there be a compactor available for a trial to increase involvement in the project?
Not at this point. We've only worked with the centralized site there just to deal with drop-off and pickups of bales. I think in that area specifically, we're going to see, once you get a couple of compactors on farms, see what kind of interest that generates. And if there is more interest in having a communal compact at that point. But the communal compactors really only make sense in areas where there's not a lot of plastic. So if you're a larger farm that's generating a lot of plastic, you're not going to be loading that plastic in your pickup truck every week and driving it to a compactor somewhere else. Like it's too much work and it's not going to become a habit. So if you're making a lot of plastic on farm, that's where it's the only real viable way for this to work is to have your own compactor on farm. It's the guys that maybe have 100 bales or don't use a lot of plastic to begin with that still want to deal with it in a better way, but that might take them 4 years to make a bale, and that's not really feasible for them either. That's more where those communal compactors I think will be valuable, or where you're making that mixed bale. So you might have a compactor on your farm, but when you're dropping that bale off, you also deal with your twine. Then we might try to have a compactor on site, but we're not there yet at this point in any of the areas for the centralized sites.
An interesting comment came in. Could I suggest a sign be made up for individual farms to promote what we are doing as an agricultural industry to promote the good that we're trying to do?
That is a very good idea. Thank you.
And then another question. Under the Waste Free Ontario Act, the Waste Authority is supposed to enforce producer responsibility like for tires. When will they move on the agricultural plastics?
I don't know that we have a timeline for that. The last we had heard was ag was pretty low on their priority list, and that was before anything to do with COVID-19 started. So I don't know that we're super concerned it's going to happen immediately, but at some point we have to deal with this in some way. And that's really what's kind of driving this. Recognizing, and it was mentioned earlier, but it's important to note, like, this is not meant to be the solution. Obviously, it'd be great to not use plastic at all, but since we're a long ways from that, this is just meant to see about providing some input into a temporary fix, a temporary stewardship model while we get our more sustainable options to market. Sorry, I forgot where I was going with that. But yeah, so we don't have a timeline per se, and I can try to find out if there is one. But given that we expect something like that to happen at some point in the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we'd like to have some information to feed into that process before it happens.
Does it create issues if we have used black wire to tie the bales instead of twine?
I want to say no, because they will likely have to, like, depending on the size of their capsules, they might have to undo the bale before they put it in. Moving forward, I mean, we just suggest twine because that's a pretty, like, it's an easy option that farmers already have, and also it is strong enough to hold the tension in place to keep your bale really nice and square. So if there's a way that moving forward it could be used with twine, but I think like these won't be just dumped into the system. As easy as that would be, I think the bale we dropped off to sea was slightly too big for their modular system, and we aren't making smaller bales, so they would have to probably undo the twine anyways. So they like to undo the metal thing anyways. I just don't know how they could do it. They could probably just have metal cutters, but yeah, we typically use twine just because that's what the compactor was built with.
Do you have an approximate number of round bales per farm that would justify an individual compactor?
So typically, if it's properly compacted, it holds about the equivalent of 500 individually wrapped bales. So, I mean, I would say that it's a personal preference, but I would say if you're making more than 300 or 400 bales a year, then it probably is enough that you'll make a bale within a year and a half or under. But it would just depend how much plastic you currently have. So if you're also comfortable storing that plastic in a tote and driving to your neighbors, if they have a compactor, and compacting it there, people with 300 bales worth might be doing that if they want that extra work. But because it holds about 500 bales roughly, that's really kind of the guiding factor. So if you know that you make 400 bales a year, then you'll make pretty much a bale a year. So you might benefit from having your own. And if you know you don't want to tote that plastic around and drive it anywhere else, and that you'll never do that no matter how many bales you have, then you might want a compactor on your own property.
So it looks like this is the last question. How is the research coming on biodigestible bale wrap? Will it be possible to mix that new wrap with petroleum-based plastics?
I don't know. I can try to find out, and Emily can jot your name down and I can try to get more information. All I know is that there's research on net wrap, twine, and looking at bale wrap in terms of biodegradable options. I don't know where they are with that. There's some out of Guelph. There's some, there's a project looking at putting the product as like a coating that you would use that would help with biodegradability for a separate project. I don't know how they would mix. I mean, in this case, because they're biodegradable, I don't know that they would be used in the system. Like, I don't know if it could be converted because ideally they just biodegrade into nothing. I think the challenge we're going to face is we already have a very different climate in Northern Ontario, and it can be challenging in and of itself. So to have a product that withstands varying degrees of climate and biodegrades, but not too quickly because you still need it to protect your feed, I think it's a very challenging product to make more sustainably. I am positive they can do it. It just might take them a little while, but there is a ton of work going on in that field, so I can get more information and share it out afterwards.
So it looks like we've come to the end of our questions. I don't see any more coming in, but this is probably a good place to end it. And if anyone has any further questions, you have our contact information. Steph, anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you all for coming. We really appreciate the continued interest and support, and reach out with any questions.
And we should have the slides and the video and the recording available. Steph should be able to send that out to you guys. So thanks everyone for coming and participating.